Timber, welcome to the show, man.
Thanks, man. I really appreciate you inviting me to be on here.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. So, I guess first thing, the name Timber, that's probably not your God-given name. Where did that
Well,
come
that's
from?
that's the name God gave me, though. It's not the name on my birth certificate.
Oh,
No,
yeah, okay.
no. My parents named me Timothy, and
Mhm.
then I've just been called a variety of different things. I've been called tugboat, steamboat, all kinds of weird stuff. Just nicknames. And then I cutting timber was my job for years, and then when I went overseas, people over there that not as familiar with the timber industry, that was their connection to me in their mind, and so somebody called me Timber, and I was like, that has a ring to it. And then it just kind of grew.
Okay, awesome. And so you're joining us from Indiana. Is that where you're
That's right.
from?
Yeah, yeah. A lot of my growing up years took place here in Indiana, and then just recently I've come back here and found a little spot, little piece of property that I hope to build a house on. So I'm actually here in Indiana right now.
Okay. And you told me off the air that you lived in Bowie, Texas for a while.
Yeah, yeah, that's an area that I love, man. Back in my kind of horse training days, I spent about 8 years down there in Bowie, and my friend of mine and I did rodeos all over the place, and I miss that area. Also did a lot of hunting. One of these deer up here is from Bowie, Texas.
Okay. Lots of pigs in that area too.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So did you, all I know about you is just what I saw on Alone season 11. So it seemed like from what you told the viewers about yourself, you kind of grew up a little bit off the grid.
I did, yeah. My parents found a little pocket of land that was, there's not many of these pockets anymore in the Midwest, but it was truly away from everybody. You could climb a hill in the middle of our place or anywhere around there, look around and never see an electric light, never see a security light even miles away.
Wow.
And so we grew up there without any electricity, any running water. It's because they wanted to be kind of separated, kind of away from society, and they achieved that for sure. We didn't even have neighbors to speak to.
Wow. What about school?
Homeschool. And
Okay.
fortunately, my mom was a professional elementary teacher, and that really helped out because otherwise, who knows whether I'd be able to read or not. But as it turns out, I got a pretty good education at home. When I went to college, I found out that I was stronger in all the basics than most people that I was around. So thank God for that. That was with homeschool, though.
So your parents were kind of ahead of the curve looking at how society has continued to degrade. We're both Christians.
Yeah,
And I think just from our beliefs fundamentally, you look around and it's like, this is not how the world should look based off
I
of our
agree with you.
perspective, right?
It's a pretty bizarre landscape, with people becoming hateful, I think, towards those of us, who might think like you and I. I've
Mhm.
experienced definitely a lot of hate even after the show from that, getting messages, about blankety blank, you and your stupid God and all this kind of stuff. Now, no matter what we all think about God, I don't know why society has to be that way. There's hostility there, and that's
Mhm.
for sure. But my parents, they sensed stuff like that back in the day. There was the Waco, Texas raid and Ruby Ridge shootings and all this kind of stuff right then when I was a young kid. But I definitely choose to react differently to those things than my parents did. Off grid living, bushcraft, that's wonderful, but that you can go too far in like fear and terror, and it can spiral for sure.
Yeah, and you alluded to some of that stuff about that in on the show. Just kind of there was a lot of fear involved there, uh, which you're raising your kids, probably somewhere in the middle, not that far extreme, but also we're not of of the world, right? We live in the world, but we're not of the world.
That's right. I want them to have a good balanced mentality, but still be able to understand and interface with everybody in our culture. I only worry that I'm not making my kids tough enough, because we don't live that way right now, no electricity and stuff. When we're out in villages overseas,
Mhm.
sometimes we do, but I look at my kids sometimes and I think, am I making them tough enough? I don't know if
Uh-huh.
I'm getting that right.
Yeah, well, so I have three kids. I on the show, I think you had two boys, and then I
Yeah.
read that you were maybe having another one.
Yeah, she's right over here, 3 weeks old. Brooke
Oh wow!
McKenzie.
Oh, awesome! Congrats, man.
Thank
That's
you.
great. Yeah, the girls are. I never thought I wanted a girl, but that's God's plan, right? And so
Yeah.
He punished me. He gave me two at the same time.
Oh, you got twins?
Yeah, identical twins.
Oh my gosh, man. See, I
Yeah.
was afraid of that. On the show, I never wanted another baby. I had my two
Mm.
boys. And then on the show, about halfway through, I'm like, man, I want a daughter. I really do. And I thought, I was leery of this. I'm like, I just miss home. but it didn't go away. It got stronger, and then I was laying out there in the Arctic. It was dark, and I'm like, God, finally on day 68, I was good with the idea. I was like, God, give me a daughter. And here we
Yeah.
are with this daughter. But the whole time I was like, now not two.
Right. Right.
So I
Yeah.
can't imagine. But that'd be wonderful, but just
Uh,
two at the same time. How is that? How it?
oh, it's the best, dude. I mean,
Yeah,
I love my son, and obviously we have a special bond. But girls are just
yeah,
so much sweeter to their dad. Like
yeah.
they're they're truly amazing, and yeah, it's a blessing. I said it was a punishment, but it's been the best blessing ever. It's
I'm sure. I'm sure
we
it is. And if
were
we had two, we'd feel the same. Yeah,
we were watching. My kids all play like competitive soccer, and so you have these moments. Sometime I'm sitting there with my wife where they're getting out to go to their warm ups, and they're walking over to warm ups to join their team together. It's like I still they're 9 years old. I'm like I looked at her. I was like I still can't believe there's two of them, and they look exactly the same, but they're so
man.
different. But they're best friends,
Yeah,
and it's a pretty cool thing.
that's a
But
gift
yeah,
from God right there, man.
uh huh.
How awesome.
So did you grow up bow hunting? I mean, I'm
I
looking at
did.
all the
Yeah,
archery stuff behind you there. So
yeah.
and
That's my bow. That's my childhood bow right there. And at the time, I thought it was like Red Dawn. I put marks on it for every kill I made. There's all kinds of deer track marks marked on the back of that bow.
uh huh. So you never had a compound. I mean, I cheat. I
No,
use a compound. You've always gone with the recurve.
I've often thought that I should switch and use compound sometimes, but then I know that the extended range would spoil me,
Uh huh.
and then I wouldn't use my recurve, and so I'm afraid of that. So I'm not going to do it.
And
But
so, what is
but
your like effective ethical range that you're willing? And it's different. Obviously, a moose is a bigger target. They're slow. They're not going to duck an arrow like a white-tailed deer. So it probably
right.
changes there. But like, how confident are you out to shooting a big game animal at X distance?
The moose kill took place at 35 yards, and as big as the chest was on that moose, it felt logical. It felt like I'd practiced at that range a lot, and I've killed deer at that range,
Uh huh.
but that's not the range I would ever choose to shoot a deer on, given if I'm doing it right, I'm going to take it inside 20 yards,
Uh huh. Yeah.
But I felt like I could hit the moose at 35. I missed it the first time because it was probably more like 45. I misranged it, by a long shot. But that 35-yard shot felt like I could make it. I knew I wasn't going to get closer ever.
Uh
Um, it was cutting into the wind, coming downwind to me. But when I'm deer hunting, inside 20 yards, I pretty much keep it to that. But I like to be about 5 feet. I,
huh.
I have to compensate for being a subpar shot by being a better hunter. So I like to get right in there.
Okay. So I didn't realize you shot an arrow and missed him the first time. And so the moose kill is filmed. It had to be like on a GoPro or something, right?
Yeah, yeah, and it makes it look like it's really far away.
Right.
Those
Yeah.
GoPros fisheye lens, they make it
Uh-huh.
helps when you're killing a squirrel. It looks like you shot a squirrel in the head at 20 yards. It's 10 feet away. Um,
Yeah. So, and
but
that's an
the
important clarification because when you are filming with those, and I've shot a lot of birds filming with like
mhm,
a head mounted GoPro or Garmin or whatever, and
yeah,
they look like they're so far away and they're not. They're like 15, 20 yards, whatever it
right.
is. Yeah.
But on the
So the
footage, it's
squirrel
like,
are always
wow,
close.
incredible shot.
Right. That's what the viewer thinks because like, wow, he just smoked a squirrel in the head at 40 yards or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um. So you shot the moose. I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves. I want to talk more about your upbringing. Trapping was a part of that growing up as well.
That was my biggest thing. My biggest thing as a kid, especially through my early teenage years, was my trap line. It was the place I lived. It was my partner. It was my home. My trap
Uh-huh.
line was.
And what did you specifically like? What did you target the most?
Every fur bear that I had there, which at the time we had a lot of coyotes, a lot of beaver, a few foxes, but then a ton of raccoons, possums, skunks, weasel, mink, muskrats, all down through all the legal fur bearers I would target, and that's how I kind of paid for college, for getting started in college, was for selling coyote furs. Um, but that was I guess I kept about 100 traps as a kid, about a 3 or 4 mile stretch,
Uh-huh.
and that was my favorite thing. It was heaven on earth to me as a kid.
What was the hardest? So I don't have an extensive trapping background. I've caught coyotes in leg holds, and then
Hmm.
I did a week in British Columbia with two brothers on a trap line. One of the coolest people ask me, "What's the most interesting or the best experience you've had on traveling the world doing this?" And I go back to that trap line that week I spent with them, In
Yeah.
BC, we got a wolf, we got 3 lynx, pine martens, got a
Oh.
wolverine, got a. Oh, I'll show you. I got a fisher. There's my fisher.
Oh my goodness. You got a fisher, man. Oh,
Yeah,
that's
and
a rare treat.
that's what they said. They said we usually catch like 1 or 2 fishers a year because it's like kind of on their fringe range there. But
Hmm.
they were excited about the fisher and the wolverine because the whole reason why I wanted to go was to get a wolf.
Yeah.
And you look, and I would go to these hunting shows, and um, you know, if you were to say book a wolf hunt in Montana, odds of seeing a wolf, they will tell you is like 20%, and then you still have to shoot it, right?
Yeah.
I was like,
Yeah.
that seems like, I mean, that's a week of my time and money. Where can I increase those odds? And it's like, oh, British Columbia, they're like 80% chance of catching a wolf. Plus, you're going to catch a bunch of other stuff. So,
Yeah.
and we ended up catching everything except the only thing we didn't catch was like, they have like these silver foxes up there. And that was
Yeah.
it. But everything, we caught ermine weasels. Yeah, it was super cool. I learned a
What
ton.
an experience, man. I'd love to try that same thing. You know, the real North Country trap line is a nostalgic thing that there's no equal in this world.
Uh-huh. The only time I've ever worn snowshoes. It was,
Oh yeah.
yeah, it was pretty sick.
Huh. Well, if
Yeah,
you want another wolf sometime, you come hunt with me in Tajikistan. There's plenty of wolves that and they need thinned out because they're killing people.
yeah. So you've been to Tajikistan
I
for
I,
hunting
I
or for humanitarian work?
both. I've spent years there, living there for humanitarian work, and then more recently, I started presenting, trying to help to promote hunts for the local owned camps there because it really helps out their economy for the Marco Polo sheep, Markhor ibex, and of course, wolf is a cheap add-on that they put in there, and they try to get everybody to shoot one.
Uh-huh. So
So
have you actually like done any big game hunting there? 'Cause, I mean, it's super expensive Marco Polo sheep. Oh my gosh, I'd have to sell one of my children.
I know I don't have the budget for that. I've never killed one of these animals over there, but someday I'll do an ibex because it's on the cheaper end of the spectrum, about ten
Right.
thousand bucks, and if I once I bring enough guys, I'll get one of those for a pretty cheap price for me, and that's what I'll do.
Right on. Right on. Super cool. And will you take a bow or a gun?
Well, I'd like to get one with the recurve bow because there's these cool petroglyphs that I found in the area, ancient, and then people with recurve bow hunting those ibex, and it's the really cool petroglyphs, and I want to duplicate that.
Huh. That would be incredibly hard, I imagine. Like
I
that's
spoke to Clay Hayes, and I'm like, from the show from Alone, I'm like, Clay, would you be interested in something like that? And so we might work something like that out and make a cool show out of it or something.
that would be awesome. Um so you paid for college essentially, at least some of it through your trap line. What's
Hmm.
the out of the area that you were trapping in, what was the smartest animal that you were pursuing?
Definitely coyote that I chomped its toes off with the trap. And then it messed me up for a couple of years, coming digging up all my stuff and not getting caught. And we did this dance of death for a couple of years, and then he won. I never got him.
Really? But you got
Oh
his
yeah,
toes.
I got his toes. It's on my powder horn for my muzzleloader. His toes are hanging there to remind me to be smart when I'm stalking stuff in the woods.
And see, that's a rare thing. The leg holds that I have, they wouldn't. I don't know that they would even chop a coyote's toes off these days.
Well, it was a bad situation. You know how the jaws are offset to give it that space,
Uh huh.
but it caught it down in the corner by just a little bit, like these two toes down here. And then I came there, it was there. I was about to pop it. But when I was a kid, I had to be out there before daylight at 5 a.m. because my dad demanded we be back at work as soon as the sun lit the sky. So I was out there before daylight, and a deer hunter came through to get to his stand. So I didn't shoot it right then because I didn't want to scare that fella. So I
Uh
was
huh.
standing there. It popped it off and ran straight away, man. It was the weirdest thing ever.
Wow. So the wolf that I got, it was caught by the toes, but it
Uh,
couldn't. It had actually. It was out on the ice, and we had like a cinder block buried in the ice, frozen in there, and then
oh,
the leg hold attached to that, and
mhm.
it pulled it out of the ice, and but you could track it. I mean, it drug it like a half a mile, and then it got it wrapped around a tree, and so there was the wolf, and I shot it with like
Oh
a
man.
22 cricket
Yeah.
and fell over dead. And then the wolverine we caught in a lynx set, and I had to shoot that thing like from 5 feet away like 4 times. It wouldn't die. It was the toughest animal.
Oh my gosh. That's why I respect them so much. Anything in the weasel family, they're just vicious, savage little guys. I love them.
And the guy was like, "Don't shoot it again. You're gonna mess up its fur." And I was like, "Dude, it's not dying." I was like, "I gotta put this thing out of its misery." So shot it a couple extra times. Finally, it expired.
Yeah. Did
Yeah,
you get to keep all these, the Wolverine and lynx fur? Did you get to keep those things?
I'll show you the links here.
Oh man,
So
that's
that's
a
the lynx chasing a
beautiful
pine
creature.
marten around a little
Oh,
stump there. Yeah.
that's
But yeah, I got to
fantastic.
keep them all. And the wolf I have full body mounted. Still waiting on the Wolverine full body mount. But yeah, it was
Hmm.
learned a lot. And then I came back and I had a deer lease at the time where, and that's the thing here is like a lot of the landowners are like, oh, we have cows. I don't really want you trapping, right? So
Yeah.
uh, that place didn't have any livestock on it. So that's when I really like for 2 years got into trapping. And I haven't done
Yeah.
it since. My traps are all just rusting away in the garage right now.
But if you've caught coyotes with leg holds, I mean, they're the wily ones where you have to use good field craft with the scent control and stuff. You know what you're doing, and
I was
that's a
starting
stage
to
that a lot of
figure it
people
out.
never get to.
Yeah, yeah. And my one of my daughters was sick from school, and since it was a small place, I think I had maybe 6 traps on it, and I
Hmm.
have a trail camera sponsor, and so I had a cellular camera on each one, and so I knew if something was there. And so I
Yeah.
had caught this coyote, and it was the middle of winter, and I bundled up my daughter and was like, "We got to go dispatch this thing." And she still talks about that. Remember the time you got the coyote, Dad, when I was sick from
Oh,
school? She was probably like 4. Yeah, but she haven't forgot it. Um,
that's experiences that you know those kids will grow up and value that forever. I don't doubt.
yeah. So were you a big fan of Alone prior to being selected?
Um, I was a big fan of the concept, but I didn't know much about it. I'd seen one season, the season with Jordan Jonas. A friend of
Mm-hmm.
mine in aid work told me, "Hey, there's this TV show. It'd be just your thing." And I watched the one season, but I liked it so much that I didn't want to watch anymore because watching it tore me up. If I'm in a different country, I can't access the wilderness like that and get my bow and do all that. Then it was just painful, to sit there and watch it. And so I didn't watch anymore until I applied for the show. And so I didn't know a lot about like what's been done on the show and what's been tried and all that right up until they, being selected.
And then you went back and watched them all?
I tried. I still haven't
Okay.
watched them all, but I'd watch as much as I could while I prepared for the
Yeah.
show.
So I go on like these benders, and I haven't seen all the seasons either. But my dad's a huge fan. He's
Mm.
always talking about it, and uh, so I'm like, well, Dad loves this, and I was like, I gotta at least check it out. And so I think I watched season 1, and then I watched season 6 with Jordan, and
Hmm.
had him on the show, and then watched Roland win the 100-day challenge
Yeah.
in season 7, and those guys each killed big game too.
Yeah.
So that was a big part of how they were successful. Um, when you well, actually, before we talk about the moose, I want to talk about your 10 items, because every contestant's allowed to take 10 things, right? And that doesn't
Yeah.
include clothes. Um,
Right.
I don't know if is the sleeping bag part of that.
It is. The sleeping bag's got to come out of those 10 items, which makes it
Okay.
tough.
So then, what were your 9 other items?
Let's see. My bow and arrow. So sleeping bag, bow and arrow, axe right here, the big silky saw, Leatherman multi-tool, ferro rod for fire, um, paracord, fishing line and hooks, cooking pot, and snare wire.
Uh huh. And out of those 10 things, was there any one that you were like, man, I really didn't use that, and I wish I could have replaced it with X?
No, I felt like I had the perfect 10 items, except for the fishing line was useless to me because the pike were too big and they would just snap it. And that's how I lost a lot of my hooks, is when I was putting out the 20-pound monofilament fishing line. It was just the strongest fishing line you're allowed to bring in your fishing kit. Now I needed the hooks bad,
Uh huh.
but that line became just useless. I had to put paracord, the inner strand of paracord out there, which is 30-pound test, and they were still busting that sometimes. But that fishing line just sat there until I made a guitar string with it, and it didn't do anything.
Right.
But
Yeah, that
other
was.
than that, the 10 items felt like it was just what I wanted,
If
pretty
you could have
much.
had an 11th item, what would it have been?
Salt. Hmm.
Salt.
Yeah, because that's the main problem with why I look skeletal in the end, was not lack of food or lack of sleep or lack of warmth. It was just salt with hydration. That's it.
Really? Yeah,
Yeah.
things we take for granted. Like, and I had this on my questions here for you, is like salt and pepper, because everything you're eating there is void of seasoning. I get unless you,
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe take some spruce or something and put it in there with in the pot as you're cooking it. But
I tried that spruce with the pike to be like, we got to flavor this somehow. Because for 2 weeks, just boiled pike was not appetizing, you know.
uh-huh.
So I tried different things and it just, nothing really helped. It's just time helped because I wake up one morning and it tasted delicious and stayed that way for the rest of the time.
And so why not grill the pike on the fire?
Well, then, you know, the little bit of that oil and grease is dripping out of it into the fire.
Uh-huh.
And I just wanted it in my body, you know, so I just threw it in and boiled it.
And so you boil it and then you just drink all the remnants.
Yeah, just drink the broth till you get down to whatever sludge and goo is left, and then you kind of waste a little bit because you're not that hungry yet. You know, there's a
Yeah.
little boiled skin. You know, the boiled skin was the nastiest thing I ate out there. Period. You know, pike skin. You scale it off with your knife. You put it in there because you want that oil that's hidden just under the skin. Then the skin comes off while it's boiling, and you have a clump of skin, and you think to yourself, to be responsible, I ought to eat that. So I have everything, and you put it in your mouth, and oh my goodness, you just gag. It's worse than a boiled sheep head or eyeballs, grub worms. It was nasty, truly nasty. That boiled pike skin. So
Oh man. Well, so unlike most contestants who intentionally like they put on a lot of weight
yeah.
before the show once they know they're going. You were pretty trim like heading into isolation.
Yeah, it was interesting because I noticed some looks from other contestants when we're preparing for launch. We're in the base camp getting camera training and stuff, and there's contestants carrying around at the very least 20 pounds, and then at the most, I think the most was represented maybe 90 pounds of gained weight, or maybe 70, something in that range. And you know, everybody's got that with them. Now, to me, that's an 11th item for sure, you know. And
Uh-huh.
so I had two things going on. Firstly, I couldn't gain the weight that much because I was working too hard in advance. I was working like a dog doing construction every day before I went, sweating it right off. And I would slam protein to try to get a little bit, but I didn't gain more than 5 pounds over my normal weight for that show. And the second thing is that I wanted to do it. If I was going to do it there and survive on the land, I wanted to do it organically with what's on the land, not to prove a point to anybody, but only to myself. And I'm not better or different than any other contestant because that gaining weight is a viable strategy. But I consider it like an 11th item, and I wanted to do it organically and raw, you know, with what's on the land, and that's definitely, you know, I don't win this show, but that's a mark that I definitely think that I make. You know, if people could point at something and say Timber did it this way, that's what I'd like him to say is that, you know, Timber did it without bringing the 11th item of a bunch of gained weight. He did it with really what lived there on the land and stuff.
Uh-huh.
So
So how much
yeah,
did you weigh going into it?
161 pounds,
And when you walked out after 83 days?
135, I think.
Wow.
Or
Okay. How
no, because I lost 34 pounds, so it would have been 120, 126, 127 pounds is what I weighed at the end.
jeez. And like the dude that won, William, I mean, he was a hulking guy, like big
Yeah,
dude,
yeah,
gained weight, and he had a ton of weight to lose, right? And he didn't eat as much as you throughout the show.
not near as much, and he lost so much more. I think he lost 70 something pounds.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Um all right, let's take a quick break and we'll come right back and keep visiting. Sound good?
Awesome.
All right, we'll put a break in there. Well, Timber, thanks for sticking around. I want to talk about like the key to making it 83 days in the art, and we didn't even say this. Like, if anyone's not familiar, you guys are essentially in the Arctic Circle, right?
Yeah, 125 miles north of the Arctic Circle, I believe is what it was.
Goodness gracious! So it seemed like the weather was pretty temperate, enjoyable at first.
Oh yeah, it was much warmer than I expected. You know, Arctic has this mystique to us in our minds, like the word nuclear. You know, it's just going to be worse than we imagine. Um, but it just stayed around in the 40s and 50s, and then when I killed the moose, it went up into the 60s, which was worst case scenario.
Yeah, super problematic.
Yeah,
And had you ever been moose hunting before?
no, it was a dream of mine.
Wow. So that's one other benefit of being selected is you got to you didn't have to pay for some extravagant moose hunt.
Yeah, I figured that I'd have to save money for years and plan it out DIY and everything and then go moose hunt. And that I worried then that if I paid all that money for it, I couldn't take my recurve because I'd want to make sure I killed a moose. So this whole thing on the moose hunt was just such a dream come true. Couldn't replace that with money or planning or anything. It was truly just a dream, a hunter's dream. And all, I
Hmm.
think you have a lot of hunters on this podcast. You guys will get it. You have that dream thing, and that was it.
So I don't have anything that would equate to 83 days, like an animal that I wanted so bad. There's been some bucks that I've put in a lot of time for and
Yeah.
not killed because they were smarter than me. Uh, and they get big for a reason, right?
Yeah.
Um, but I did go to Colorado 3 different times for a mountain lion,
Mm.
and I wanted to do it on dry ground. I found this houndsman who came recommended. Like I wanted to go with the houndsman. I didn't want a guy with, and this isn't a knock on anybody that has hounds and hunts cats, but it's not hard to track them in the snow. You find the
Yeah.
track, you let the dogs go, and they're generally going to catch up to that mountain lion. I wanted to do it on dry ground, like the old
Yeah.
way, with a guy
Yes.
that had hounds that were up to that task. And so I went in April. Colorado used to have an April season. Now Colorado's trying to get rid of mountain lion hunting. You're probably aware of that, but
Yeah.
uh, we've talked about that to nauseum on the show, so we don't have to go down that road. But yeah, so I went in the spring, and conditions were terrible. It like rained or sleeted most days. We got on a couple tracks, and the weather would turn, and it wasn't good. Went back in December of the next year, and there was a lot of snow on the ground, which wasn't what I wanted to do. But at that point, I had already after a week, I called my wife and I was like, "When do you have to go back to work?" And she's like, "Don't do it, you son of a, you know what?" And I was like, so I added 3 more days. she
Yeah.
she wasn't happy about that. So then I went back that next December in the snow because I was like, well, I gotta kind of like if you booked the moose hunt, you want to get the moose, right?
Yeah.
Tempted to take a gun or whatever. And I was like, well, okay, so I'm gonna do it in the snow. And we caught 2 females and let them go. We didn't have
Mm-hmm.
to, but his mission is conservation, which another
Yeah.
thing I respected about the guy. And he's been hunting cats for 30 years, and he's killed one mountain lion, and it's in his living room. And everything else he lets go, or if a client shoots it, that's fine. But he's like, we don't kill females. So we caught 2 females, let them go. Went back the next year, and the first day we went for the first time. We'd been hunting on BLM land. This first day, he had a rancher that had contacted him and said, "Hey, I've got a problem cat. It's killed 2 of my foals. Can you come sort it out?" But with the understanding of whatever we caught, we had to kill. Right? There
Yeah.
wasn't we're going to let this one go. So it ended up being a female, and I looked at him and was like, "Dude, I really want a big Tom, but at this point, this is our 18th day together,
Mm.
and the cat has to die, and either you have to kill it or I have to kill it. And if you kill it, then we still have to go kill another one. Oh, and we did it on dry ground. It was in December, but there was no snow that year.
Yeah.
And so I was like, I think we've met the expectations of what I wanted out of this, the experience. And we are helping this rancher out. So I shot it, and yeah, I have no regrets. I do want to get another one. I always said, oh, I only want to kill one mountain lion. No, I love hunting with dogs so much that I want to go back, and I do want to get that big Tom.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you get it someday. I feel it, but what a cool thing to do it on dry ground, to take out one that was killing a rancher's horses, that's
Oh
that's
yeah,
pretty awesome.
yeah. And he had like 30 hounds and different teams of you can't run the uncut males with the cut males because they'll attack them, right?
Yeah.
They take the testosterone out, and then you can't run them with. He had a group of just cut males and females that were one pack, and I got to know all the dogs. You spend 18 days with these things, man.
Yeah.
Yeah. And one time I asked him, and I've mentioned this on the show. I was like, which one's your best dog? And he's like, that bitch Mickey over there. She's got the coldest nose. And he's like, and a lot of my other dogs have come out of her.
Mm-hmm.
I said, so what if somebody wanted to buy that dog from you? He's like, dude, I wouldn't sell her for $50,000. And he's not a rich guy.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
He's like, but if she catches me 5 mountain lions a year, that's
Mm-hmm.
Don't
So,
take
are you a
long to
dog
get
person yourself?
Oh yeah, labs. I mean, I mostly hunt
Yeah.
waterfowl and dove,
Yeah.
anything with feathers.
Right.
But yes, I've had 3. I'm on my 3rd chocolate lab right now, and
Wow.
yeah, I love it. Hog. I don't know if you ever went hog dogging when you were in Texas, but that's
Not with dogs, man. No, but I'd like to. I should like to.
talk about something primal is
Yeah.
sticking a Bowie knife in a pig.
Well, Marine buddy, he does that when he's stateside. I
Uh-huh.
work with him in Ukraine and other places, and he forged this knife for me just for doing that. And he was he was doing that while my baby was being born. And aside from that, I'd have been with him and had that experience this year. But I was at the hospital.
Yeah. Well, God is good, and there's no shortage of
Yeah,
opportunity for that. Come back to
yeah.
Texas. Prior to the moose, what would you say was the highlight of your big game hunting career?
With my experience being much more pedestrian, Midwestern, whitetails, hogs, coyotes, that kind of thing. I'm not like a lot of guys that's, been up with the big caribou herds, spend a
Mm-hmm.
lot of time with elk. So I think my black bear, I've got a Boone and Crockett black bear. And I think that probably was the highlight. But to me, that moment it's just as I appreciate just as much even a small whitetail that I killed for meat if I'm like 5 to 10 feet away from it. To me the execution of a hunt is just as good to me as something on the wall because I like it. I just want it to be executed perfectly to where that thing is just struck dead without any knowledge, and it's I like that execution and the closeness so much that to me I like those moments just as much as I like, the bear, almost as much
Where did you
as the
get the
moose.
bear?
It was a Minnesota bear, which it's a big bear for Minnesota because it's smaller bears up there a lot.
Yeah.
But it was a nice big boar. I think it's 6 foot 8 inch rug, I believe. And I was
Nice.
really blessed there. And it turns out that it's my favorite meat on earth, black bear. So
Uh-huh.
I'm definitely getting more into that.
Yeah. So this one here I got in Alberta,
Oh, that's a
and
nice looking bear.
that was with the compound. I haven't taken up the recurve, but they didn't want to weigh it because it was spring,
Mm-hmm.
and they've come out of hibernation, and so they don't they don't want their clients to feel like, oh, it didn't weigh that much. It's like, so everything was about the size of the skull.
Yeah.
Like, obviously that's
Yeah.
what Boone and Crockett is measured in, and the trophy's in the eye of the beholder. But
Mm-hmm.
the bear weighed 400 pounds. Was like ish, right? We didn't weigh it, but they're like, yeah, he's probably 400 pounds. And I'm
Wow.
like, that seems like a big bear. He's like, yeah, but during the winter they're like 600 pounds. So
That would have been that's an incredible bear then for a black bear. I don't know how many listeners know this, but you don't often find a black bear that big, even if you go on a paid hunt.
unless you're like in North Carolina, or I saw some dude in
Yeah.
New Jersey last week shot a 700 plus pounder,
I
but
saw that picture, blew my mind.
yeah, the fat one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so that's cool that you got a Minnesota black bear. Um, so as far as the moose is concerned, our experiences were very different. I shot one in Newfoundland, and we would take a boat across a lake, get in an Argo, and then go to wherever we wanted to call. And then we did a lot of walking from there. But
Mm-hmm.
once I actually shot the moose, and the guide who's lived there his whole life was going, "Wah," and we were on
Yeah.
I think we were on day 3, and we hadn't seen a moose. And we'd already called it the spot. I recognized it because there was a tower that he was like, my grandfather built that tower like 30 years ago. I'm like, well, is it even safe to get in at this point? But I was like, we've already called it the spot, and I'm like, okay, I'm like becoming a little pessimistic at this point because we hadn't even seen one. But that's the way hunting
Yeah.
goes. And he's like, "Wah," and then all of a sudden you just see these trees start shaking, and he's like, climb up in the tower, get in the tower, and I'm like, what? He's like, look at those trees over there, and I'm like, oh yeah, they are shaking, and all of a sudden this bull just comes out real slow and walks broadside at 75 yards, 300 win mag, dropped him.
Oh man. Well, I love that. You just reminded me so much of this hunt because when you said the bull walked out, I could see your memory working. You were tipping your head like this. You know how they
Yeah,
angle their horns like that, to catch the sunlight and like intimidate a rival and stuff. It's magnificent. Oh, it's
yeah,
unforgettable.
yeah, so cool. But then we quartered it up, put it on the back of the Argo, then put it in the boat, and then put it in a helicopter, and took it to the. They call
That's
it
pretty.
they call it an arbitoire, which is just we call it a processor where we're from, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that was the extent of my uh, taking care of the moose meat. A lot different from your experience. Once you shot the moose, um, that's when all hell breaks loose. It's like, now I've got all of this work to do, and you said temperatures were rising, not ideal,
Yeah.
and you're trying to build your permanent shelter. Which, if anyone's watched Alone, shelter is one of the most important things on the show, and you built
Yeah.
a pretty big, robust shelter. So you've got all this going on, and you've killed this moose, And I'm feeling bad because I'm obviously looking at your physique and like he's already in pretty good shape, doesn't have a lot of weight to lose, and you're burning all of these calories.
It took me down. That was my crisis days for the whole show. It was right after I finished smoking the moose. It was day 21. Um, Evening of day 20, I looked at the viewfinder of the camera and I'm like, oh my goodness, I look like someone from day 40 who hasn't been eaten.
Yeah.
And it was just that the stress and work, generated by having to preserve the moose. Normally the transporting of the meat and the butchering, all that kind of stuff, that wouldn't daunt me. But having to preserve the moose quickly and like all that work, it compounded it so much. And I felt like with big game, I faced worst case scenario. You look
Mm-hmm.
at past contestants who have killed meat, and then the weather's just getting colder and colder, and the meat is stable, it's freezing, and you just have to keep it safe from predators. But for me, I had to face a week of 60-degree temperatures during the daytime, and preserving that really took me down. I worked so hard, I barely ate during that time, and when I looked in the camera on day 20, I said, now I have to make a big change or I'll punch out. I'll punch
Uh-huh.
out, physically. And that was my crisis days. I was in, I was in a weaker condition right then than I was on day 83 when I went home.
Really?
Yep.
Wow. Yeah. You looked a little haggard, and you could.
Mm-hmm.
How far away was the moose from camp?
Uh, it was, it wasn't quite a mile one direction, but I figured altogether I walked 30 miles, making round trips until I got it all back to camp with
Barely
the head
eating.
and the hide, barely eating. Yeah, the 30 miles. And it was heavy walking because it was a lot of muck and brush and stuff like that. So I figured it was about 30 miles.
So would you put one quarter on at a time?
I did that once and it was too much. It killed my back. In the show, you'll see me balance a shoulder up on me. And that thing, now I'm not a big guy. That shoulder was nearly my size. It's
Yeah.
almost as big as me. So I got that back to camp without falling in the river and then, put it down. And then I said, no way. I cut it up smaller into, muscles. And then I used sharpened sticks and crossed them over my shoulders and carried that. I got all bloody down my back and stuff. It was pretty gory.
Yeah. So I mean, I've packed out a handful of elk and mule
Mm-hmm.
deer in the mountains, stuff like that. And the elk is, you put an elk hindquarter in your pack, and maybe some backstrap. God forbid you have to throw the rack on there. I mean, we
Yeah.
weighed the last one my buddy shot in Wyoming, where we really like did a true pack in pack out style hunt. We weighed our packs when we got back, and mine was like 108 and his was 113. So,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
then
You feel
and that's
that,
an
especially
elk.
when you're on
That's an elk. You're
terrain.
talking about a
Yeah.
moose.
Yeah. And this
And
boy
no,
was pretty big. I don't know what that moose weighed, but just guessing, it was the size of the bigger horses that I've had in my life.
oh sure. So the one I shot in Newfoundland, they don't get as big as the farther north you go, the bigger animals get.
Mm-hmm.
So look at like a Yukon or Alaskan moose. You're talking probably over 1,000 pounds. Mine was probably like 700-800 pounds. Some of them
Gotcha.
like 1,200, 1,400 pounds. Yours was massive.
They estimated on TV that, the producers of the show have these survival experts that work with them and do all those captions. And they wrote on the show that it was 1,200 pounds, and that there was 600 pounds of meat laying in my camp. But I think it was bigger.
Yeah, incredible. And so how far along were you on the actual shelter when you shot the moose?
I just had the superstructure of the ceiling, just those logs in place,
Uh-huh.
mostly in place, about 80% in place, and then I had to construct, first I had to construct a cache down by the river that would keep the meat cool while I finished the shelter because the meat was in danger of spoiling.
Yeah.
So I had to keep it cool first. There was a north facing bank and I dug down into that, trying to replicate something we did as when I was a kid to keep milk from the milk cow cool.
Uh-huh.
And then build that shelter, cut a bunch of logs for the front, doing moss chinking, which I had to walk a mile round trip for a load of moss because where they put me, it was just a swamp. It was submerged in the springtime, so moss didn't really grow there. So I had to walk a mile round trip with with an armload of moss. And so everything just took so
Uh-huh.
much energy. It really took me down.
And chinking is something that most people probably aren't familiar with. That's where you to the log or stick structure built, and then you come in and you seal all the cracks with the moss.
Yeah. Yeah, so I was
Mm.
tamping all that moss down between the cracks, and that's what you're talking about with the chinking, and I did it
Mhm.
really tight. I felt like it's been when you're inside, there wasn't one pinhole of light anywhere. It's probably one of the tighter shelters. I really stuffed it in there and then put the big thatch on top of that, then the boughs on top of that. It was 2 foot thick on the roof. And but I put so much work into that. You don't have to have a shelter that tight, but I wanted one that my wife could live in. I don't know why. I just
Uh-huh.
wanted it.
Yeah. Well, and so obviously there's bears there. Did you ever see a bear?
Nope, I was disappointed. So disappointed. I had that bear around my camp all the time. There's a
Uh-huh.
grizzly that's on camera, caught on a game camera, taking away my moose bones, and I wanted so badly to see that thing. He was always around, but because I was marking the territory everywhere and all that, I think he just stayed invisible. He would only come out there in the nighttime right around my camp, and I wanted so badly to see that bear because I've never been near a grizzly, and I just wanted to, and it never happened.
So I've seen them multiple times. Went on a black bear hunt in Montana, and we saw more grizzly than we did black bear on that hunt.
Mm.
I haven't ever seen one up close and personal, and I'm not sure that I want to unless I had a tag in my hand. Uh,
I'm sorry about the baby crying in the
I
back. Is
didn't
that
hear.
coming through?
No, no, it's all right.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, she's
Yeah.
really worked up.
No worries. No worries. Yeah, but you obviously had wolves around as well.
Yeah, there was a good pack of wolves around. That the lead wolf had tracks that were the size of my hand on the ground. I couldn't imagine. I never imagined a wolf track that big. I bet it could have fit my whole head in its mouth. And I mean, just I don't know. But I think it was some of the wolves that Dub filmed from his camp, probably. Um, can't tell for sure. But those wolves never messed with anything I had. They went right through my fishing area a bunch of times and they went around. They never touched a thing.
Huh. But when you're building these meat caches, it's really the threat of a bear getting in there, right?
And Wolverine, because
Yeah.
I was hoping a black bear would come and try to get in because we were allowed to shoot black bear, and I would have loved to pile a black bear inside that cache. But
Uh-huh.
can't shoot the grizzlies, and they could rip into just about anything and take your meat at one fell swoop. Wolverine could take all the fat in one sitting, just about. So I really protected that fat that I rendered down. But bear and Wolverine was what I was worried about. But turns out the little critters are way worse. It was way
Right.
worse for me to have the mice and the mink, the little critters.
And then you moved everything closer to camp where you could
Hmm.
monitor it. And you did catch a wolverine on camera one night trying to get into
Yeah,
your second food cache.
and he really tried to get into that thing from the marks in the snow and all that. He spent some time trying to figure that thing out, but he was thwarted. So I
Yeah.
felt good.
And you said I wish he'd come back so I could kill him and eat him. And
Yeah.
you go back to season 6, and Jordan did actually kill and eat a wolverine that was
Hmm.
trying to mess with his food.
I was so determined. I thought this will make a beautiful poetic connection on TV if, I kill a moose and then a wolverine comes and I kill a wolverine, because I'm like, man, I'm just going to duplicate Jordan's thing out here. And I thought that was going to be awesome. Well, the wolverine just never came back. After that one raid where he ate a bunch of my fish bait and then he couldn't get in my food cache, he just never came back.
Yeah. Were there any porcupines out there? I don't think I
No.
saw anyone shoot a porcupine on that season.
No, and we spoke with some locals afterwards, and they said that you rarely see one around there.
Huh. Okay. So other than obviously the moose, you ate a bunch of pike, and
52. Yep.
you caught 52 pike.
Yeah.
Oh my god, that's incredible. And
It's got
then
to be a protein record for the show between that moose and the pike. It's got to be a protein record.
yeah, um, and then a bunch of grouse.
Nope. Never had any grouse.
You never got
Uh,
one grouse.
no. No,
Oh
there
wow.
was and amongst all the contestants, it seems like the grouse only camped out at William's house.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the grouse are stupid birds. They really
Yeah.
are. So I've gone specifically grouse hunting in New Mexico with the dogs.
Mm.
And then I've shot them with a bow on just about every elk hunt I've ever done.
Yeah.
Uh, and my one time I think we were fly fishing in New Mexico, just walking up the trail. My buddy just threw a rock at one and killed it. I mean, they're not smart animals, and it's a wonder. Like, if there was an animal that I was like thinking next up to go extinct, I would think like blue grouse would be the
Yeah.
first thing that comes to mind. And Williams over there, he made a pole with a noose on the end of it, and is just walking up to the guy that wins the show, just walking up to grouse, putting the noose around their neck and catching them. Like, how
Ah,
insane.
it's astounding to see that on screen for him to do that. It just blows my mind. But like you said, if you've been around those grouse at all, you know that you can see, oh yeah, I can see that working,
Yeah.
because those birds, they don't fly away like a robin, you know.
Right.
Um, but I would have loved to see a few grouse down my way. I was hungry for some bird, but it wasn't lack of food that was my problem. But I still would have loved to see some of those grouse.
Yeah. As far as like internal organs go, I love bird. Like you talk about heart,
Yeah.
liver, kidneys, gizzard. I'm all in. Wild turkey, love it. And like I mean, we shoot a lot of dove in Texas, and we always keep the hearts. My kids
Oh,
love them. I mean, I have their mind warped into thinking it's like a wonderful treat. It's like their favorite thing.
well,
Most
their
kids
minds
don't
isn't
grow up
warped.
like that.
You've got them good there. And that's cool from a conservation standpoint. I love that you save that part of the dove because a lot of guys don't. They save very little of it.
Hmm.
So that's really cool.
Yeah, yeah. So I love organ meat, and I imagine you ate well, surely the moose heart is phenomenal.
Oh man, yeah. And but that's what the mink wanted when he got in that first food cache. The food cache that was less secure just to keep the meat cool. Mink got in there and he ate a third of that heart in one sitting. He knew
Mm.
right where to go. A
So
lot of
what?
minerals in that heart.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. What was your favorite internal organ from the moose?
Well, heart for sure, because I don't like the flavor of liver.
Uh-huh.
I the lungs, um, I would have eaten, but I didn't get to them because I was so busy preserving the all the meat and all that kind of stuff that I would have taken the lungs and brain and more bone marrow is the big thing that I would have still gotten from the moose, and then I didn't because
Uh-huh.
that's it sitting out there in that temperature, and I'm working on all the meat and all the fat, the
Hmm.
priorities, and I was it's one thing I do different is I'd even if it meant a little bit of meat spoiling, the bone marrow and the brain and the lungs would be more critical.
See, I love bone marrow. Oh, it's tough to
Yeah,
beat. Uh-huh.
it's
I don't know
buttery,
about lungs. I
delicious.
don't think I've ever eaten lungs before.
Well, from a big animal like that, they're harder to get used to because they're kind of doingy, tough, and it kind of feels weird. But from a little animal, like all the hairs I got once the snow hit, the lungs were just a bite, and it was all potatoy and it's delicious. I love the lungs and heart were my favorite organ,
Uh-huh.
for sure.
And how many rabbits did you catch?
Let's see, it's carved on this axe. I think it was eight or 10 or something like that. I caught every one of them that came through. That's for sure. Everything that the owls and the martin didn't kill, I caught every one of them, and it's looks like eight.
Okay. That's
Yep.
cool. So the trapping obviously played a part in your success there as far as supplementing your diet with
Yeah.
the hares.
It
Uh,
was such a boost of morale to not eat hard dried jerky whenever I would get a hare, and it was just delicious boiled fresh meat with some organs. It was a big morale boost.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so when was the fishing best versus like when did it take a turn for like now this is extremely difficult?
Okay, so the fishing for me was going great guns all the way up till ice started forming on the edge of the river. It was almost like I couldn't beat the fish off with a stick. I just had fish, and then when I killed the moose, I had to pull my fish lines because I was working so hard that I didn't even eat. So dealing with all the fish that I was getting became a hassle. So I pulled all my fish lines for the best 2 weeks, the best week or two of the fishing, which was right about day 15 through 21. There was just fish, fish, fish. I mean, you could just watch them come in the pike, that is, if you had organic bait. And then when ice started forming on the edge of the river, it just ended. Boom. Like in one night, it ended. And I caught a couple of burbot afterwards. But the pike were gone. I think my stretch of the river was shallow enough that when the ice, especially when the ice went over there and I was ice fishing, there was nothing left. There was no
So you
pike at
never
all.
caught a pike through the ice?
Just one
One.
little guy.
And what did the burbot taste like compared to the pike?
Oh, burbot are so good. It was like buttery, larger flaky meat, kind of in layers, less bones, and just all buttery. I thought I died and went to heaven when I first caught a burbot.
Uh, One of the things I thought was super cool is because you took this part of this animal that you had killed, and then you fashioned a gorge hook, which that is. I'll let you tell the listeners what a gorge hook is. Oh, there they are, right there.
I've got a couple right here hanging on my wall. These are splinters of bone from the moose ribs, and I took these ribs back from the grizzly. What went into where he had dragged the carcass, which is a little dangerous.
Yeah.
But I needed these bones, so I took them back. This is a 3 inch long splinter of bone that's really tapered and sharp. I honed it down to where it's at least as sharp as a thorn on each end, and then
Yeah.
it swivels in the middle. I drilled a hole in the middle with my tool, and it swivels in the middle, and my wire leader is tied to the middle of that. So what you do is you put the bait on it to where it holds the gorge hook with your line, perpendicular to your line. Now you'll want the end of your gorge hook that's on the line that you'd pull to be sticking out just a little,
Uh-huh.
like you'd see right here, sticking out just a little. When the pike swallows it, that sharp end will catch in his throat, and then boom, it swings sideways, and both ends go through his throat, and he's caught good.
Wow. And how many did you catch on those?
Not many, because that was right towards the end. You'll see it's snowy when I'm getting the gorge hooks all set up, and that was close to when the fish were starting to shut down.
Uh-huh.
So I've not that many, to be honest with you. Once I started catching them on the gorge hooks, it was only a few days after that the fishing really shut down, and then it would be, just 5 or 6 more fish, and then it was over.
And that's out of necessity because you've lost most of your hooks at that point.
Right. Yeah. We could take 25 hooks with us. There was an incident on day 2 when I was wading through some brush, and I had my hook packet, which was just a hook stuck through a piece of leather from one of my pieces of gear. And it ripped off in pieces of brush, and I lost a dozen hooks, which this isn't on the show. I lost a dozen hooks. So I did that. I caught all those fish with 13 hooks, which the fish were always busting those lines and taking hooks away. So I lost them pretty quick. And then that's why I needed the gorge hooks, which worked, I would say, just as effectively as the steel hooks.
Really? Oh,
Yeah.
that's cool. And was that something you'd ever done before, or something you had heard about and was like, this is a technique I'm going to use on the show?
I was familiar with it and I'd tried it, but I'd never perfected it before. And then on the show, I thought, if this is going to work at all, I got to make it perfect. I got to put my best foot forward. So I felt like I perfected it with the shape and length of those, looking at a throat of a pike and kind of imagining it. So I had never found success with gorge hooks before until the show. And then it's kind of a recipe with the length and the sharpness of the thing, the type of bait that you use. It really worked out.
And so, what was the best bait?
So I was using pike stomach for most of the time. Whenever I would kill pike, on day 1 when I killed the squirrel guts went in the water, and that caught me a pike within an hour. Two pike that first night. And then from that time on, I used bits of the pike. We use fins sometimes, but what I found that they really liked was stomach, because it would the little stomach piece would kind of swell, and then it wouldn't bury in the mud on the bottom of the river, because it was deep, icky mud down there. But it would kind of bob along, there just on, they had a little bit of flotation to it, but it would sit on top of the mud, and they would come and just scoop it up. So I would save a foot out of every pike stomach that I caught, and I had stashes of that everywhere. In every dirt bank, I would dig a hole and stash it. I had chopped open logs and hollowed them, stashed it in there, and tied it back together. And that's what the Wolverine raided in the end. He ripped apart those logs and ate my bait.
See, did you store the rendered moose fat in a log?
I stored that in birch bark. I made
Okay,
I
birch
made
bark. Yeah.
canisters out of birch bark for the moose fat, poured it all in there, and then put it in my food cache. Yeah.
And then how did you consume that? Did you just eat it, just the lard itself, or did you mix it in with something else?
I fried fish in it for 50 days straight. Every single day I had a meal of fried pike at the end of the day, which doesn't really make the show, but I learned how to make it real crispy and golden. It was delicious. I felt ashamed of how the luxury that I had there, you know. I didn't even film the meal because I felt ashamed to present how good I was eating. I had a meal of fried pike every day, up to day 80 at least. And so that's how I do the lard. I put it in there and experiment with frying fish with it. And then at the end, I would crumble up the last few pieces of fish into the oil in the bottom. And this is toward the end when it was getting cold. I started worrying about getting frostbite as it was getting cold. And then I
Uh,
started consuming a lot of that moose oil from that melted lard, and even drinking about a cup of it. Uh, yeah, about a cup of it each evening. And that brought my circulation right back. And then frostbite wasn't a problem.
yeah, because there was at one point I thought you were going to be like maybe medically extracted because you had what appeared like frostbite, but you had said, "Oh, I think it's just a circulation issue."
Yeah.
So it ended up not being a severe, like, because people have been removed for frostbite before on their feet.
True. I didn't lose any skin over this, so it didn't blacken enough to be actual frostbite, but it was gray and waxy, meaning that it was problematic. You have to be When you have gray and waxy skin from cold, that means there's no circulation in it. It'll frostbite instantly
Uh-huh.
when you're not careful with it in cold temperatures. That gray waxy skin will turn black instantly and freeze if you're not actively keeping your foot warm enough that it can't reach that freezing temperature. So that's why I was dancing with a bad situation there. But um, it never turned, drinking that moose lard really helped my circulation come back. And then I stayed warm at night. And that was the real trick, is getting that oil in me. And so that moose lard was the saving grace. That was the best gift of that moose. And then
Mm.
on my feet, I didn't lose any skin when I came home. There was no true frostbite, but well, I probably shouldn't say this. Yeah, I almost said too much there. Some
Okay.
behind the scenes stuff about another
Uh,
contestant, and that's their business and their story
yeah.
regarding frostbite. But
Yeah.
yeah,
I mean, History Channel was like, yeah, just stay away from the real behind the scenes stuff. We don't want to
yeah.
give too much away.
But this
Let's
detail is more about another contestant's personal journey
yeah,
with frostbite that definitely is not revealed on the show. But I don't want to say that.
sure, sure. Let's take another break here. We'll come back and continue the conversation. Sound good?
Awesome.
Okay. Put a break in there. Timber, certainly enjoying getting to know you and talk about this incredible journey in the Arctic Circle. So you smoked the moose meat for the most part in your shelter before you moved into it, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep. I had to smoke it all except a little batch that I kept fresh. I had to smoke it all or it spoiled.
And then, like throughout the experience, you talk about how the jerky is tough on your teeth. I imagine for all of us, it would be like just eating jerky. Your jaw would get tired, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm.
But you had an issue with your teeth that made it even more difficult.
Yeah, I have really problematic teeth, compounded by the fact that I let a dentist in India in some village do a root canal job on me before, and he did a terrible job of damaging a bunch of other teeth around it. I didn't know
Oh,
what I was doing because I'd never been to a dentist in my life. I didn't know if it was supposed to be that way or not. So I just let him do it. And then he ruined a bunch of teeth. And ever since then, it's been terribly painful and problematic. So it wasn't so much the fault of the jerky. And a
yeah.
lot of people are like, man, you should have boiled that jerky, but I boiled it often. I pounded it up with this axe, pounded it up into a pulp and then boiled it. I did everything I could, but it's really just the fault of my teeth. They're that way,
Uh-huh.
painful all the time.
So when you got back, were you tired of jerky? Are you still? Do you look at jerky and be like, I'm good?
No, it's funny. When I got back to base camp and I was being reintroduced to carbohydrates and sugars, I got out my moose jerky and I was eating it, in the base camp. And then I would hide it when they'd come in. And then when I was in the airport coming home, the first thing I bought was jerky, the Jack Link's jerky or something that has all the
Uh,
delicious flavors in it. And still I have a bit of moose jerky and I just treasure it, save it. I'm just holding on to it because I like it so much.
wow. So you still have some?
Oh yeah.
Oh
I have a
man.
very small amount now, just a few pieces, and I'll probably eat some today because I've got to get it eaten. It's been over a year, and that's probably not great. I got to eat it up, but I
Yeah.
can't let go of it.
Yeah. No, I get it. I get it. Um, that's incredible. So you actually brought that back with you.
Yeah.
Um, well, you know that the series does shed some light. Like when a person has to tap out, they'll go back to base camp, and a lot of times they'll be reunited with another contestant who's already tapped out, right?
Hmm.
So you mentioned like getting reacclimated. So that's part of the deal is they have to. I don't know how long you have to stay there, and I don't know if they want you to say that, but you have to stay there for a little bit of time to, I guess, make sure they got to make sure you're healthy and can go back home and travel, and
Hmm.
then they've got to reintroduce things into your diet again.
That's true. It's usually about not throwing your system into shock because during World War II, when a lot of prison camps are being opened, they discovered this thing to where if nobody had had carbohydrates or something like that for a long time, and then they just hammered a bunch of it, they die.
Uh,
And you can throw your system into such shock, and so they're really careful with the show now, and they do a wonderful job with what's called a refeeding program. But I have to say this, and this is a plug for the other two contestants at the end too. The crew, it was just a formality for us three to go through that because they'd never seen three people in better shape. Me and Dub and William, they're like, you guys are healthy and well. They'd
uh,
never seen people in as good a shape, and this is just to give a shout out there to Dub and William also because two wonderful, wonderful survivalists.
yeah, dude. And watching it, I mean, I honestly didn't know who was going to win. I was pulling for you. I mean, you were obviously the guy
Thanks,
I
man.
gravitated towards. And a lot of it was like the moose kill and the big game. Like I was like, cool.
Mm-hmm.
That's my guy. This is the guy I want to win. Um, but and then I'm watching William, and the guy's like, he's not eating much. His food's getting stolen left and right. You know what little he has,
Mm-hmm.
and but he had a lot of weight to lose. Dub also was very skinny though. Didn't have a ton
Yeah,
of weight to lose. I
right.
think he made it in. I mean, he made it past 70 days.
80,
and
day 80. Yeah.
day
He's in the
80.
day 80 club, which is pretty
There's,
narrow club.
there's not many. Yeah. But I really didn't know who was going to win. All of you guys, your mental fortitude, and I want to talk about that. Obviously, this is a physically challenging undertaking. People are getting extracted for starvation all the time on every season. So what was it? What was describe the battle between physical discomfort and mental anguish, and which one was ultimately worse for you?
The mental thing is much more difficult because the physical discomfort, hate to say this because a lot of people are like, oh, wow, that's really extreme. But, it didn't feel that extreme except when it got cold because the physical discomfort, if you build a shelter well and you build a bed well and you have a sleeping bag, it's not a ton of discomfort, so it's kind of like you're in this thing that's considered an extreme sport, but it's too easy on you, in some ways because the laying in your sleeping bag for 21 hours of straight darkness is not easy. But then
Yeah.
again, it comes down to the mental. Your back hurts from laying there, your kidneys might hurt, or something. But if you're in good shape, if you're doing well, it's a mental thing. And that mental anguish was you know, manifested itself in a lot of ways. Here's the biggest one for me. You can tell at the end of the show that William is so comfortable out there in his mind because he knows exactly what winter will feel like. Now, me, on the other
Uh-huh.
hand,
Yeah.
I'm comfortable in my body, but in my mind, I don't know exactly how bad winter's going to get. And it's this Arctic mystique, so when it comes down to cold and you're like, oh, it's cold now, you have no way to know how cold it is. And in your mind, it could become -40. So you're thinking, if this is only 10 degrees, then it's got 50 more degrees to fall. I'll die,
Yeah.
you know? And but if this is -20 already, I'm fine, and
Right.
you're always there's no information to work off of. And so William, he's got that experience. He's like, I feel it. This is what winter is. I know exactly it's going to be like this for the whole winter. I didn't know that when the temperature dropped on the day 80 and it got real cold, that's the bottom line that it was going to be for that whole winter. We had done it. We were done. We
Yeah.
we were there for the middle of the winter, and in my mind, it was still going to drop 20 degrees colder, which puts weight on you, puts pressure on you because it's a lack of experience in the Arctic. It comes into play and it hurts your mind. And there's other mental games there too, like the darkness and the silence. The darkness and silence was a big deal. The silence was so deep that the tinnitus in my ears from gunshots and explosions and stuff almost drive me nuts on some days when it was really still because it was so loud and you couldn't even make a sound with your voice that could overcome the silence once all that snow was real deep.
Yeah. And I think even Dub had said, I think he described it pretty well when he said, solitary confinement. You understand why that's the worst punishment you can get in prison.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I
Which
was like, that makes sense. And that's basically what you guys are doing.
Yeah,
It is
and
what you're
even though
doing.
you're doing stuff that you love the most, it's still solitary confinement. You're stuck in a void with no edges when it comes to that silent in the winter. It's a
Uh-huh.
void. It's a true void, like being in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean.
And how often because we've all made mistakes in our lives, things where we're like, I wish I wouldn't have done that. And you don't just forget about those things.
Yeah.
And I'm sure with 21 hours of darkness and you're just laying there in your sleeping bag trying to stay warm, I'm sure that you think about those things.
You hash over everything that you've done in your life that's significant and meaningful, both good and bad. And it can surprise you what is significant about your life. We go through life being insulated from reality by, our conversation with other people, our phones, our input music. And when there's nothing to insulate you from the fabric of life, it could surprise you when you look back and think, oh, that was the biggest deal in my life, or that was the most meaningful. And you have to hash over every one of them when you have that much silence and that much contemplation. You have to, because you can't stop it. It's a train and it's coming.
Yeah. And you can't turn it off, huh?
No,
There's
with
no
any
way to.
input, I would have loved some music because I could have pushed memories of war zones, memories of death and people who took it and died near me. I could have pushed all these stresses into the well where they belong and just kept ignoring them forever. But I couldn't. I didn't have the strength to keep it in there
Mm-hmm.
because there's nothing that we normally use as the lid for that well, which is input, conversation, music, stimulation. There was nothing. And so it all gets out there. But I was glad it did. It's one of the best things, one of the best results for me, period, from Alone was healing because of having to face every stitch of everything.
Self introspection to the 100th degree. I mean,
Yeah.
Jeez.
Yeah.
So you keep talking about war zones, and you mentioned a dentist in India screwing up your teeth. So what do you do, like, in your everyday life? And I know you talk about on the show humanitarian work, and it's
Yeah.
taken you all over the world.
Hmm. Well, I'm a freelance humanitarian aid worker or relief worker, and I don't know how many of them there are, but it's a weird thing, and it's hard to wrap your mind around for folks. What I got into was where my life changed from growing up in mortal terror and fear, wanting to even kill myself to get out of my situation. That was my story as a teenage person. Where that changed was overseas on a trip helping orphanages. It was a trip I didn't want to go on because I thought it was dumb, but for some reason I just went, and that's where God found me. I like to say, because I saw like fear in the eyes of these orphans, and I saw, because they were told that Jesus valued them,
Mm-hmm.
that fear seemed to go away, and the light came on of being valued, being valuable. It was incredible to me, seeing that. And then I wanted it for myself, and my life transformed, and that's what made me want to. I said I want to be in places where people are desperately needy. We all have needy neighbors, and we won't ignore them. We
Right.
got a homeless camp here in my town, and I go down there with some groceries. But there's other countries where people are really needy, where people are being killed, hunted and killed, where children have got nothing to eat. And I said, I want to be there because I want to see that happen again. The fear go out of people's eyes. Fear is the great killer. In our life and in our world. More so than hate. Hate is just a manifestation of fear. Anyways, so I wanted to get into aid work. So when I left home and went out into the world, I didn't know what to do, but I went to college and I said, I want to get something that'll help me get overseas and do aid work in out of the way places. So I studied linguistics. Always been interested in language, research linguistics. And then during that, I found out about hundreds of languages throughout Asia that don't have an alphabet of their own. And in those places, it's poverty stricken, it's underdeveloped. Our modern industrialized world is clashing with them, and it's eating up their culture. Their culture is disappearing, and that's creating hopelessness, despair, drug addictions, all this kind of stuff. And I said, well, that's where I want to pour myself into. So I started as a research linguist, trying to alphabetize, trying to develop an alphabet for languages that were in this critical condition, not having their own alphabet, to where they could work on education materials, literacy materials, to try to bring through this, try to bring hope and a sense of purpose to people, and then trying to love them like I think Jesus would, in addition, to be like, well, what do you need? Do you need me to just talk with you, to be a friend? Do you need groceries, and that kind of thing? And I didn't know an organization doing it like I wanted to. So my wife and I just went and did it on our own. And that's why I end up saying I'm a freelance humanitarian aid worker. And it's
So how do
really
you?
hard.
That can't pay well, and who's paying you to do
So
it?
that's a good point. It's always stressful financially because it requires so much money to get to these places, and then you're giving stuff away. It requires so much. So I've raised money for projects before
Mhm.
from groups that are interested in relief work in those part of the world. Usually it's churches, individuals that have a heart for that and stuff. I've raised money for that before, but half of the money we use, I just make with my own hands. When we're here in the States, I build things, and that's what I'm doing today. I'm on lunch break right now from building the big barn dominium with my friends. And I work hard, to try to make ends meet. I don't raise all the money.
Uh-huh.
Can't raise all the money, evidently, so I work hard. I get in debt while I'm over there. I come back and I work out of it. And then that's what we do. It's a weird life, man. It's a weird life.
Wow. But so, like, as far as how you support your family, is it like donations, or, like, I don't know, like,
It goes back to that 50%, about up to
yeah,
50%. It's the donations that we receive from
okay,
people interested in doing it, and they finance it, and they're like, use this for groceries for you, and meet the needs there too.
yeah,
So we do that. And then 50%, it's the money that I can make when I'm stateside.
uh-huh.
It's about split that way.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It sounds like such a nice thing. Oh, I want to go do this mission trip. Okay, it, that requires a plane ticket.
Yeah.
That requires someone feeding you, housing you while you're there. I've been to the Dominican Republic. My mom's a dentist, and very involved. I grew up Southern Baptist. She's very involved with philanthropy, and
Yeah.
so I think I was in eighth grade the first time she yanked me out of school for a week and took me to the DR for a mission trip. And
That's cool. Did
I didn't know what poverty was, and I didn't know what racism was, because the
hmm
Dominican Republic, they share an island with Haiti.
hmm
There's a lot of racial tension there, and I didn't know that
Yeah.
existed. And I
Yeah.
was like, man, I'm 13 years old, and my buddy I became friends with, because like I said, I went down there 3 times. I think I went to the DR 3 times with my mom, and the church that we were working with, the pastor's name was Manuelo, and his adopted son's name was Wilson, and he was about my age, and we would play baseball in the barrio, with the baseball's king in the Caribbean,
Yeah.
and you hit a ball and the latrine's just running down the street, and the kids don't even think twice about it; they just pick it up, and
Yeah.
that's and then I become friends with this kid, and we're staying like the last couple nights. You go on a mission trip, but we treated ourselves to staying in like a resort at the end.
hmm
And I was like, Wilson, you want to? He'd never stayed any place like that. I was like, you want to come stay here with me for a couple days? And the security guards wouldn't let him in, and I didn't know why. And my mom told me it's because he's black. He's got darker skin than them. I was like,
That
are you
tears me up,
serious?
man. And that's what we don't get. We have problems here in the States, that's for sure. But we think that we're just underexposed to the reality in other parts of the world. I'm talking about U.S. society, because
Yeah,
in a lot of countries like this, it can even be one shade of skin color, just one shade, and actual hate. Actual
yeah,
hate. Like, I'll try to hit you with my car, if you're one shade darker than me or something like that. It's like that. And it
yeah,
tears me up. It's like, it's horrible.
yeah. Well, so we all said, our whole team of, I don't know, there was probably 12, 15 people, like, well, we're leaving if he can't come, and they let him come in, but begrudgingly,
Good for
you
you
know.
guys, man. Good
Yeah.
for you guys.
And then I've been on multiple. I've been on 7 safaris now in Africa, and dude,
hmm
there's real racism there, and people think that we have it really bad in this country, and there is racism, and I don't think you'll ever get rid of it. You never will,
hmm
but it isn't like the rest of the world, man. It is.
Yeah.
The rest of the world's, like you said, the places you've been. It's fear. People are
hmm
living in fear, and it's truly sad. And then I've been to the Amazon rainforest probably,
Oh,
I think,
wow.
4 times for the same type of deal. And we'd stayed on a houseboat for a week, and we're going down. And like my mission was, and I was in my early 20s at the time. Actually, went, I think 18. I was 18 the first time I went. I just did like a soccer slash fishing mission. So I played
hmm
soccer with the guys. We would share the gospel, and then we'd give them lures, and that
Yeah.
was like gold to them.
Mm.
And one guy, 13-year-old kid, had gone into the jungle for like his rite of passage into manhood. They go into the jungle and they go on a hunt. And he killed an ocelot, which, like, is here is like protected. Like, we have a few in South Texas, but
Yeah.
and he gave me the pelt.
Oh.
Like, he paddled up in a dugout canoe as we were pulling out to go to the next village on our houseboat. And the translator was like, "Hey, I'd given him a soccer ball and then given him a bunch of lures." And he's like, "This guy wants to give this to you." And I was like, "I can't accept that." He's like, "You're
Mm.
going to insult him if you don't." And he gave me his prized possession.
Oh.
And I don't know if I'm like legally, I guess I can say it because there's got to be a statute of limitations on it. But
hmm
I didn't know at the time like how big of a deal an ocelot pelt was to try to get back into the United States.
Mm.
And I just stuck it in the bottom of my carry-on bag and just brought it back. Now
Oh my
this
goodness.
is before 9/11, right? And
Yeah.
before all of the screening and everything else. So
You're definitely covered under the statute of limitations then, no
yeah.
doubt.
So I've got this ocelot pelt anyway. It's
Well, thank you for being the kind of person that you are to like be in those situations and do that though. I admire that, and I appreciate it so much. And what I love so much about cultures and places like this is, even though having very little, they will give you their number one possession. I
oh yeah.
admire that.
Yeah. It was, yeah, like she said, the guy was like, "You're gonna insult him, you have to take it." I
Yeah.
was like, Okay, I guess I'll take it then." And I haven't done a lot of like faith-based mission work since my early 20s, but I did shoot at Cape Buffalo in South Africa, and we took half of that meat to the local school there,
hmm
and they sang and danced in appreciation for that protein, dude.
Yeah.
And I played
Yeah.
soccer with the kids, and the soccer field was paid for by $100, and the well they dug there was paid for by $100. And so while there wasn't a faith element to it, it was humanitarian work, and it was all paid for by conservation, by big game hunters that were willing to put their money where their mouth was.
Well, thank God for hunters because of that and conservationists. And that's exactly one of the reasons why I want to promote hunts in Tajikistan, because the communities there are close to my heart, and those dollars do help the communities, and it goes right to them. Well, a lot of it does, not all of it. A lot of it goes right to them, which is it's them helping themselves because it's their business.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, 100%. Let's take one more break here, and we'll come back and keep rolling. Sound good?
Okay.
All right. Are you good on time?
I am. I've got another 20 minutes probably before I have to run up. My buddies will give me an extra long lunch break. But
Okay.
if you tell me if you want me to answer or be differently about any particular
No,
thing, I
you're
want this
doing
to be
no,
just what you want.
no, man. 100%. You're doing great. I'm enjoying it certainly. Okay, Timber. Thanks for sticking around, brother.
Thanks, man.
So you guys go to base camp for like an orientation week, something like that. You meet the other contestants. You're in camp with them for an extended period of time. Did you bond with any of the other guys or gals before being dropped off?
To a certain extent, yes, but not deeply. I think I bonded deeply with the other contestants after the show because beforehand you're very cagey, and you immediately like everybody because everyone has that leathery energy that wilderness people all have, and they're good people. Every one of these contestants on season 11 are people that I would hang out with. But there's a little bit of apprehension because of you're trying to keep a lot of your thoughts private to keep in your mental space for being alone and having just said bye to your family, you
Mm-hmm.
know? And I don't know how every different contestant handles it, but for me, it meant just keeping a little layer of insulation there, even though I wanted to cut loose and just camp with those people forever.
Right.
But it was after the show really that I developed a bond, and it was, Dub and William are the primary ones just because we were in camp together afterwards. Just such good friends.
Uh huh. Okay. And you go from the first guy that's extracted medically, chubby. He makes it 4 days. Ends
Mm-hmm.
up sticking one of his broadheads ends up in his leg, like horrible injury. Like, there's
Yeah,
no way the guy could stay. He had to go. Like he
that
was
could
in
have
bad
killed him.
shape. Yeah, for sure. And so you go from 4 days to 84 days in William. So there's
Mm-hmm.
the extreme from how short it can all be over
Yep.
to how long it can last. Who did you think, like, when you get to camp, and I'm sure like you're all sizing each other up, like who did you think was
Definitely.
going to be the stiffest competition?
William always, to every one of us, William always felt like a man among boys there because his reel that he used to get cast on the show, he was out there in -20 and -30 out on his front porch and the ice all down his beard and he traps at all times and all this kind of stuff. So he always we everybody knew that William is going to be in his element and that's going to be hard to go up against. So but you don't know if he's going to get sick or something or maybe injure
Mm-hmm.
himself. But I figured that it would be William, Dub, and Jake. Now, no, I want to give a shout out here to the other contestants because I viewed every one of them as better than me in many ways. But I thought William, Dub, and Jake just personally would be indestructible. And
Uh-huh.
and I think Jake definitely is that quality of man. Who knows what happened inside his guts? But I thought those three men,
Well,
they
yeah,
were in my mind the whole
he
time.
didn't take a crap, and
Yeah.
so and that impacted bowels. I mean that has removed lots of people historically
Oh yeah.
on
Oh
the
yeah.
show, or giardia. I mean that's the opposite, right? But that happens seems to happen
Mm-hmm.
quite frequently to folks too.
Yep.
Um, your faith was a huge part of the man that we all saw on display during season 4. I think you even recited a passage from Psalm. I don't was it 27? I don't remember what.
Psalm Psalm 27. Yeah. What's something that's
Uh-huh.
got me through all sorts of bad times.
And what? How does that
Yeah.
go?
The Lord is my light and my salvation.
Mm,
Whom shall I fear?
yeah.
The
Whom
Lord is the
shall I
strength
fear?
of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? And it goes on to talk about the enemies encamping round about you, and then they stumbled and fell. I just love this psalm within the deepest part of me. I love this psalm. From difficult times, from conflict times and war zones, I love this psalm.
Mm. So my kids know the 23rd Psalm. They can recite that and do periodically at bedtime as we're saying our prayers. And then Philippians 4:13, I can do all things through Christ who
Yeah,
strengthens me is obviously
there's a good
a
one.
lot of people know that verse.
Yeah.
But that's when I try to impact on my son. Be like, dude, if you're ever having a hard time or think you can't accomplish something, that life's too big or this task is too big, it might be just school. Like he's in 6th grade for the first time he has homework and like assignments that, you can't just blow them off, right?
Yeah.
there's responsibility. I'm like, bro, say that verse. You got it. That's one
Hmm.
that I've always leaned on. But it was cool to see you share your faith. I don't know, I can't recall, and like I said, I haven't watched all the seasons, but I don't know that anyone ever recited a Bible verse on the show before. So
Or at
that was
least if
pretty
they
cool.
did, it didn't make it into the cut on TV,
Mm-hmm.
because there's hundreds and hundreds of hours of film, and I know there's been Christians on the show, but I'm lucky. I was thanking God because some of that made the cut, and I loved my kids to hear it is the main thing.
Yeah. Well, and I think a lot of people get grow closer to God throughout that experience. Even ones that maybe weren't really faith based. I mean, there's a lot of like
Yeah.
praise God going on when I caught this pike that I was about to starve,
Yeah.
like I mean like
I think as hunters, we're talking to the hunting community right now. And as hunters, we are people who are confronted regularly on a hunt with how many things are outside of our hands.
mm-hmm.
In the natural world, there's so many factors and what animals will do. And there's a lot that's out of our hands, no matter how good of a hunter you are. And I think most hunters pray.
Mm-hmm. Well, I definitely if I miss church and I'm sitting in a deer blind, I don't feel that bad about it because I feel pretty close to God in those
That's my
times.
temple out there, no
Yeah,
doubt.
yeah. Um,
I'm not that comfortable in church, just so everybody knows. I speak in churches and I do different things, but it is very difficult for me because the environment of church is not my jam. I'd much rather be out there with you hunting deer, out
yeah.
there.
Well, you talk about the $500,000 prize being very important for you and your family,
Hmm.
as far as trying to build because your family goes all over the world and you take your kids with you.
Hmm. Well,
So,
not everywhere. I want to make this clear because I've gotten some flack for this. I don't take my kids into places like Ukraine where there's active war and combat going on.
uh,
I go in there with my buddies, but I definitely don't take my kids in there. So there's a limit to where I take them. But yes, most of the time they're with me overseas.
so you wanted to win the money to build, like, to have a more permanent um, upbringing for them, like
Yeah.
a place to always come back to after we go and do our work, which is very important. Um,
Connection and stability.
the stability. And you walked away from that on day 83. And there was one moment, I don't remember what day it was, but it was towards the end where you actually picked up the sat phone and were about to push the button and tap out. And then you put it back. I was like, oh, yeah. It was like cheering. I was like, yeah, good. Don't go. What day was that? Might have been the day
That
before.
was,
I don't even know.
yeah, it was 82. It was the day before that.
Uh-huh.
And the reason is I'd come to this conclusion, and this is how you change during the show. You change out there. I think alone, it's the story of humans more than the story of survival, and so the story of humans, that makes the story of change. For me,
Mm-hmm.
changing was healing and becoming, getting over all of the desperation I felt after PTSD and just weariness from death and stress and all this,
Mm-hmm.
and healing from that. Then it changes your perspectives. And that $500,000 would have been, now you only get half of it at the end of the day. So
Right.
you could only buy so much of a house, for
Right.
250. But that's what I thought I needed. And even more than that, I thought I needed the identity of having one more than anything, more than I needed air. I'm like, I'm not going to go past this experience without having that identity. I can't live without it. And then when you get satisfied because God sees you and he's thrilled that you're a creature on his land, doing your thing.
Mm-hmm.
He's you're enough because it's God that made you. He looks on everything and he says, it's very good. Everything God made, he says, this changed me so much, man. God looks on every person, and I made him and it's very good. I absorbed that. I took that in for maybe the first time in my life. And then I'm satisfied in my soul. And then I could see it clearly. And what I realized was this: that money would only solve one round of decisions for me. Because in my life, I want so badly, and my wife does too, to go back and to serve in these places where people are needy. Can't do without that, because
Mm-hmm.
life is not just about survival to me. It's about an effect that you can have, I hope. So I want to do that. That'll take round after round of decisions all my life long. And that money would only solve pretty much one of them, one round of decisions. And then what would I have left? What would I have left is what I am. And what
Mm-hmm.
my family needs then is what I am. And I'm like, so what I am right now is I'm the most well and stable person that I've been in years. And if I can't lose that. I can't lose that. I can't argue against that by just going hard after just money. And then I began to think, well, this money could really complicate my life too. Having come to that conclusion on the night of day 81, it came out of nowhere. I'm a person who does hard things immediately because I'm afraid to procrastinate on them. That's why I grabbed the phone on day 82. I'm like, if that's my decision, it's my decision.
Yeah.
and I'm just gonna do it instantly, rip off band-aids everywhere. So I grabbed the phone and then it just didn't feel right. Those buttons burned my fingers like fire. And turns out my wife wasn't in base camp yet at that time, and it
Mm.
wouldn't have been right at all. So on day 83, I wrestled all through that night. Can I make this decision? Because I'll have to give up a lot. And I'm not talking about money, just being the one who wins. If you make it to second place, then in the viewership, everything that you did sucked.
Right.
Everything that you did couldn't lead to a win. And I said, I have to swallow that and take it because objectively, I know what I did. And I got to day 83 really well. But I said, I have to swallow that perception and take it. That's the pill I have to take. So I wrestled all through the night. And then day 83 came around and I'm like, I know my decision, and so I'm going to be happy. And I was happy. So,
Yeah.
so incredibly happy.
Yeah. You didn't look like there was any regret. Uh,
No.
a lot of people are very emotional, and they're leaving with a lot of regret for one reason or another. Uh, you didn't appear that way at all. Um,
Thank you.
so yeah. So has God blessed you since the season wrapped up?
God blesses me every single day. Look, my daughter's laying right here beside me,
Mm.
man. I asked for this daughter on a loan. God's given me valuable things. Oh, you're going to get me here. Okay. You're bringing me right back to a loan. And I'm not a crier, but at the end of a loan, I was tearing up because of how the value of what God has put in me and in my life. God's given me this daughter. He's given me, you know, a moose head to hang here that represents a job well done. He's
Yeah.
given me my healthy two boys. There's a story about how God healed my son from muscular dystrophy. He was supposed to die when he was 12 years old. Um, so God has blessed me so much. But if you're asking financially, like solved all this and given me a house, no, there hasn't been any. I think I've made $180 from a loan based on my YouTube channel. So that's
Yeah.
that's what it is.
But you did write a book.
Yeah, yeah, and it's launching and it's out there and it's just launching and I hope that it sells well. That could be one way that God brings us money towards that house or whatever it is that we need.
Uh-huh. And so what is the name of the book?
All right, this book right here is Memoir of a Wild Man. It's a pretty thick book, and for better or for worse, it's about me. I put a lot of my life in there, and it's a crazy life, which brings a lot of weird stories. You guys will enjoy these weird stories because it's a collection of stories that's very esoteric, but it's told all through the lens of a loan, blow by blow, every single thing that happened on a loan, the deep dive, and then my life sprinkled throughout there. So just finished it up and launched it.
That's cool. I'm gonna have to pick up a copy. Absolutely, man.
Thanks, man. I hope you enjoy it. I really hope.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I know we are about out of time here. But
Yeah.
hunting season is here, so what are your plans for this fall?
Well, I just killed a meat deer Saturday with one of my arrows from Alone. This arrow right here, and thank God the arrow stayed in one piece too. The deer didn't roll over and break it.
Nice.
I need two more meat deer, which I like to put in the freezer, about three. I'm going to find somebody to give some to because I think that's real important. And the main thing is I'm just going to I'm going to enjoy moments out there in the woods. When these leaves are yellow, I soak that up. It's the color of happiness. When you're really close to a deer, like 5 feet away, I want those moments. And I want to do that and help my sons to taste some of those moments and then thank God for the season when it's over.
Awesome. Awesome. And have your kids started? How old are they? Have they started hunting yet?
Yeah. So I've got a 10-year-old Levi
Okay.
and a 7-year-old Elliot, and they've just got into squirrel hunting with me with my 22 this
Nice.
year, and they love it to death. And they want so badly to boil those squirrels in my Alone cooking pot afterwards and just eat them right on the spot. That's what they want the most. So they like to get out there with me and kill squirrels, and that's what I just had for lunch.
Awesome. That's so cool. I wanted to talk a little bit about the camera behind the scenes. We don't have time. I know you've got to get back out there and start sweating again.
Yep.
Continue working. But was there anything that you wanted to capture on camera that you didn't, looking back on the show? And a couple other highlights that I personally enjoyed: Death by Fire. If y'all don't know what that was, check that out. That's when I think like people are starting to get a little crazy when you're carving up little wooden creatures, and then and I'm sure it took you a long time to carve them up, and then you just throw them in the fire one by one, like it's a
Well,
dice game.
I pretended to throw them in the fire. I brought
Oh,
all of them
okay.
home and played that game with my kids. Yeah.
But
But
that was cool.
I was going mad. I was descent to madness for sure by that
Yeah.
time.
And then your song that you wrote, like you made a bass with the moose antler that you found,
Ugh.
and they actually played the whole song on the show, which was super cool.
They played a good portion of it, and I've done a music video to cover the whole song on my YouTube channel. You guys can catch that if you want to. It's really
Yeah.
goofy and fun. But the whole
But like
song's there on
you
my
could see the
YouTube.
mental like delirium, like infiltrating the song just a little bit.
Yes.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. I thought it was super cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
But was there anything you wanted that you didn't get on camera that you're like, dang it?
You know,
Because there's got to be a learning curve there, and I don't think you're the type of guy that had been filming himself a ton before this.
not a ton. I filmed almost everything I did, but there
Mm-hmm.
was the way I got that fish back. There's a fish on the show, episode 8 or 9 or something like that, that
Oh yeah,
I
that got
lose the
away.
fish and then got it back. I wish I'd have filmed better how I got that back because it was amazing. It happened the same day, just a few hours apart. And I was literally sitting on the shore of the river and I decided to ask God for the fish back. I
Huh.
was like, God, I'm looking at the river. There's nothing out there for hours. This fish is gone and it's on a stringer pole. There's a current and there's no chance of
And
finding
you're
it.
keeping it on a
And
stringer to keep it fresh.
exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
And I got it on a pole to hold the stringer at the bottom of the river so the eagles didn't take it. It was complicated,
Mm.
a lot of ingredients there. So I'm sitting there and I'm like, I believe God could give me this fish back. And I was just struck by that thought. And then I'm like, this is going to be weird if he doesn't. And I'm asking. So I'm sitting there and I'm like, God, can I have that fish back? Right then, that stringer pole comes to the surface of the water in front of me. Right then. And I wish I'd
Uh,
have captured that better on camera because to me it was just cool.
yeah, yeah. Well, man, Timber, I appreciate the time, man. Y'all check out the book. Show it to me again. What is the title?
Yeah, Memoir of a Wild Man on
Memoir of a
Amazon
Yeah. Well,
by
you're
Timber
certainly a wild
Cleghorn.
man, dude. 83 days in the Arctic. I enjoyed it. Thanks for jumping on the show. It's been nice to get to know you. God bless you and your family, brother.
Thank you. And thank you very much for having me. This has been real enjoyable. And to connect with the hunting community as my people, and I love it. So thank you.
All right. Take care.
Thank you.